Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. I'm Nicole Alfonso, a therapist at Wellspring and the host of today's show about DBT therapy. We're going to talk about a specific therapy today. So today, our show is called Understanding Therapy. What is DBT therapy? We are going to just kind of dive into this because this is a therapy that's kind of thrown around. And people don't really understand it. So we want to help our audience and our listeners understand what is DBT. And so with me today to do that and discuss this topic is our Wellspring Clinical Director, Monica Snyder. What a privilege it is to have you on, Monica.
Thank you.
The boss of bosses here. Obviously, we have our president and then we have Monica Snyder, the Clinical Director. Thank you, Monica, for just choosing this topic. I know this is actually something that you believe a lot in, this type of therapy. And so I appreciate you taking the time to do this show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me here today.
Of course. So together, Monica and I will want to tell you a little bit about what DBT therapy is and the focus it has to improve emotional well-being in everyone. So stay with us. We got some really good practical information coming your way. All right, Monica, just in a few seconds, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here at Wellspring.
So my name is Monica Snyder. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and an EMDRIA approved consultant. And so what I do at Wellspring is I do a lot of the supervision and the day-to-day clinical management of Wellspring. I'm also writing an EMDR training, so that's pretty exciting. I'm a wife and a mom. I also love to read and I love just being outdoors and spending time with my family.
Awesome. Thank you, Monica. So this topic is very relevant because we all need to learn to live in the present and manage our emotions, right? This is everybody. We all need to do it. So there are many different therapeutic modalities, but today we're going to focus on DBT. So tell us, what is DBT? What does it stand for? And just give us an overview.
Awesome. So DBT stands for Dialectic Behavior Therapy. It's an evidence-based practice, which means that it has been researched and found to be effective across a wide range of concerns and with effective across diverse backgrounds, which includes age, includes gender, sexual orientation, race, and ethnicity. But even some of the things that you can work with DBT on are things like depression and anxiety, borderline personality disorder and mood disorders, anger, ADHD, self-harm and suicidal thinking, PTSD, even things like eating disorders or affect instability. I think it's interesting because one of the reasons I love DBT so much is because not only is it helpful for that whole list of things, and there's even more on that list, we didn't have enough time to list them all today, but it also can be a preventative therapy. And so a lot of times we think about coming into therapy because we're depressed, we're anxious, we're struggling with ADHD or parenting or trauma, right? But we can also come in because we actually want to learn positive skills. We want to learn how to be more mindful. We want to be more emotional regulated. We want to have better interpersonal relationship skills. And so DBT is a wonderful therapy for those moments.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to get to the point of depressed and anxious or having a mood disorder to get tools, right? To help you manage emotions, which we all have at some points. Worse than others, right? So,
Yep.
So what's the purpose of DBT? Like, how can it help us?
Okay. So I forgot to mention that DBT is actually created by Marsha Lindham. It was created in the 1980s by her. And she had two beliefs. One was to achieve a meaningful life, we must accept things as they are. And she also believed that the ability to change is necessary for growth and happiness. So she created 4 goals within DBT. And so these are kind of the purposes. It's to live in the moment, to regulate emotions, to develop coping skills for stress, and to improve interpersonal relationships.
Those are all so key and so important to live the abundant life that we should live, right?
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay, so let's get into these components. Tell us about those specifically, I guess, going through those, just kind of living in the moment, regulating emotions, coping skills, interpersonal relationships. Tell us more.
So there's a couple components that make DBT DBT. And so within those 4 goals that we just talked about, there are things like radical acceptance. And so Tara Brach, I like this quote from her, says that radical acceptance is the willingness to experience ourselves and our lives as it is. It's using mindfulness, and we'll talk about that maybe in just a minute. Dialectic thinking, I mean, we talk about it being dialectic behavior therapy, right? But dialectic thinking is being able to hold 2 different, seemingly different ideas at the same time. So for instance, I'm really angry with this person, but I still love them. And so sometimes like we feel like we're so angry, we can't love them. They can't, they can't stay in our lives, but we actually can be angry with somebody and still very deeply love them, right? It's the use of validation. So a therapist is learning how to validate our clients and their experiences, but also as clients, it's important that we learn how to validate ourselves and our thinking, that we're not putting ourselves down or like, oh, we're crazy all the time, but actually that we are able to say what I'm thinking and feeling actually makes sense based on what I'm experiencing around us. But overall, I think it's really interesting because what Linham says is that a lot of our concerns, this emotional dysregulation that we often struggle with, it comes from emotional sensitivity. So it's the biological component of emotional sensitivity mixed with an invalidating environment. And she calls it the biosocial theory. And so when you have both of those components combined, a lot of times we do find that we struggle with emotional dysregulation.
Yeah, I could just think of me right now and those 2 pieces, and I could totally see how I get dysregulated at times, Yeah. I love this whole concept of radical acceptance. We believe so strongly in that here at Wellspring, just with the fact that we need to face the truth in our lives so that anything can happen, right? So any change can happen so that we can heal. So I love that. That is so in line with us and our vision and mission for our clients. So let's talk about there's 4 different types of skills.
Yes.
So tell us about those skills and how do we become more aware of kind of those things in our lives?
Yeah, so the 4 skills I think are just so key. And like I said, even in that proactive seeking of therapy, right? So the first skill that we learn is mindfulness. It's being aware in the present moment without judging. So it's, I'm feeling really upset about something and I don't have to judge that like, oh my gosh, I'm a bad person for this, or I can't believe I think this, but actually that there is just an ability to say, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I'm thinking, or this is what I'm experiencing without judgment. Emotional regulation is the next one. And so we have to be mindful to be able to move into the rest of these components just as a key. So emotional regulation is understanding our emotions, changing unwanted emotions, and developing skills to reduce vulnerability to emotions. And so once again, you're going to see that each of these components really tie in with each other, because if I'm not mindful, if I can't understand, or if I'm not aware of what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, maybe what the environment around me looks like, then it's going to be really hard for me to know when to use, for instance, one of the next skills, distress tolerance. I need to use a stop skill or a tip skill, and maybe we could talk about that in a little bit, but to stop for a second, take a breath, because I can see that I'm building up, and I may not make choices that are going to be healthy, right? And then to use an emotional regulation skill. So distress tolerance, like I had just mentioned, is really getting through crisis situations without making things worse. It's the ability to accept the situation as it is and make a choice in that moment. So sometimes that's going to be things like a distraction skill. So maybe I am going to go watch TV for a little bit just to chill out and calm down, or I'm going to go work out, or I'm going to go call a friend or something. And I'm going to put it aside for a second. And then when I'm a little calmer, then I can come back and make a better choice about what I need to do. And then the last skill is really the wraparound, which is interpersonal effectiveness. And so it's maintaining healthy relationships, but it's also ending destructive ones. It's maintaining self-respect in relationships, it's getting our needs met, and it's setting effective boundaries. And so, for instance, sometimes we feel guilty about ending a relationship. We're like, that family member, it's family, we have to stay in contact with them. Or I've had this friend for such a long time, how do I cut them out? And sometimes we need to say, actually, this relationship is bringing us down. It's a negative relationship. We need to set a boundary. Maybe it doesn't mean cutting them out completely, but how do we set healthy and appropriate boundaries in that? But it's also learning about, once again, being able to come and say, this is something I need, or this is, something I want, maybe even as the case, and doing it in a way that's respectful to the other person and respectful to ourselves. And so those are the 4 components: the mindfulness, the emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and then interpersonal relationship skills.
As you shared these, I could see how they do go, it's like you got to do one to follow to the next, to do the next and do the next. Because I think of, if you're not mindful, or I just taking myself as an example, if I'm going through an emotion that I don't like, I'll just go for some food. Like, let me just eat something so that I don't have to feel this emotion, right? And I don't move on to the emotional regulation piece, which is, okay, wait, like, it's okay to have these emotions. Let's think about it. Let's journal. Let's do something effective with these emotions, right?
Yep.
And then of course, if you go into a crisis because you're dysregulated emotionally with a spouse or a friend or a child of yours, then you're kind of go out of control, and now you're not doing relationships well, right? Yeah. And so it's like I see that going through that as just kind of an example of what that looks like, completely off the.
No, but those were all
having.
I would say those are also important, though, because I think, sometimes when we get into therapy and our counselors are like, let's work on mindfulness. And we're like, why do we need to do this? We know what mindfulness is. We do what, but exactly what you said, it's deeper than I think what a lot of times we think mindfulness is, because it is even those ideas of like, I can be aware that my stomach is getting tight and my shoulders hold some tension and I'm feeling upset about something, because in my head, I may be a very logical person. I'd be like, I'm fine. Look at all this stuff. I've got a plan. We're good. And if I'm not aware even of some of the tension my body is carrying, I may actually end up in an interpersonal, interpersonal situation where I'm talking to somebody and I'm more short-tempered than normal. I cannot tell you actually how many times my husband will be like, well, you feel a little snappy today. And I'm like, I'm fine. I don't know what you're talking about. And then I stop and I'm like, oh yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
I just saw this tension and I am coming out differently. And so I have to come back and use my skills and apologize.
These are great. These are really great. And I just want to touch on something here that wasn't really part of the plan, but I think it's important because there's all kinds of therapy out there. And we call DBT a bottom up type of therapy. And so if you could explain a little what bottom up or top down means, because I think it's super important to recognize that when we do bottom up therapy, we are going to the deeper parts of us, right? And then top down is like more intellectual, right? More rational, like more in our the top of our brain, like just like the rational part. And so sometimes when we go from top down, we're not acknowledging the deeper stuff, right?
Yes. So top-down therapy.
You explain it better than me, please.
No. Those are actually really good. I was going to say, so top-down therapy is really using our prefrontal cortex of our brain. So it's going to rely on our ability to develop awareness of our thoughts and use these current or past situations to interpret and change when needed, just our thinking patterns that may be off, we call them maladaptive thinking patterns or behavior patterns. And so top-down therapies really are working to change our view on the situation and respond in a healthier way. And while those can be super effective, we know CBT, for instance, has been researched, people use it all the time. The struggle is that if we have experienced trauma, which could be even in the womb. Like if we had, and it could be unintentional by a mom, but if for instance, I had a really stressful pregnancy, or I had a lot of stress going on during my pregnancy, there's going to be a change in my child's brain that can sometimes lead to them being more predisposed to anxiety or depression, for instance, right? And so sometimes it's not even a situation that we've experienced, but it's actually a predisposition because of those early childhood or even prenatal experiences that we've had, right? So if our brains have developed in such a way, or we've experienced trauma, that we end up staying in our brainstem a lot, the bottom half, as we might say it, of our brain is really overdeveloped. And so the amygdala is constantly sending these smoke signals of I'm in danger, you're in trouble, be aware, whatever. And so we're kind of in that hypervigilant or always a little bit panicky. These top-down therapies are really hard, and they can actually lead to people feeling like failures in therapy because they're like, I know intellectually these things, but I can't seem to change my body's responses. And so bottom-up therapy actually works on body sensations and movements to access the trauma. It seeks to access and engage trauma in ways that the trauma is actually stored in our bodies versus the cognitive side of trauma. So bottom-up therapies often work to teach our limbic system safety so that our prefrontal cortex can actually come back online. And so DBT actually is, I think it's unique. A lot of times people will say that DBT is only a top-down therapy, but I actually feel like it's a combination of bottom-up and top-down because we are bringing that awareness to mindfulness. We are working on skills that are going to help our bodies be more regulated in the ways that we interact. And then we can also bring in, as that prefrontal cortex is online, we can bring in some of those top-down parts of how we see situations and our awareness of things and stuff like that. So I think that's part of the reason I really love DBT is because it kind of holds both of those components at the same time for full healing and awareness.
Yes, that's great. What a great explanation. So we always like to incorporate our faith into everything we talk about. So how does DBT relate to my life as a Christian?
Oh, this is a good one. So, when I think about DBT therapy and just being a Christian, the first thing that comes to mind is that we are called to be mindful and present in our thinking. And so, for instance, if you think about Philippians 4:8, it reminds us to think about things that are good and excellent, honorable, and so forth. Isaiah 43 actually talks about God telling us not to dwell on the past, but to notice the things that are here and now. Psalms 37 reminds us to be still before the Lord. And so I think, as we think about the fact that we're supposed to be mindful and in the present moment, that we're supposed to be spending time in God's word and stillness and in prayer and things like that, it allows for us also to have a deeper connection with how our body's feeling and our thoughts, which allows for us to build these coping skills. I think so often we're so busy. Our society says we have to be constantly on the go and busy. And so even our devotion time, sometimes it's like a quick, okay, I've got 10 minutes, let me do this. But when we actually set aside that time to spend with God, and sometimes we're afraid to because of this point, but it does allow for us to be much more aware of what's going on around us and within us, and it can stir up those things that help us to be mindful in our day-to-day lives. We're also called to be emotionally regulated. James 1 talks about being quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. Ecclesiastes talks about not being quick in our spirits to become angry because anger is, it lodges in the hearts of fools. And so when we live in emotional dysregulation and we're not choosing to use our coping skills, we really aren't honoring God. We're not living as Christ has called us to live. And it can push people away, right? We're not being good witnesses. When we see somebody who's emotionally dysregulated, we're not seeing Christ in them. And so I think it really becomes hard for us to be witnesses for Christ in those senses. I do think I want to be cautious though, because there are times where we're struggling with things like depression or anxiety, especially that can be biological. And so these are not the things I'm talking about, but it's more the emotional dysregulation that is not living a Christ-like example. But even in that, it is about seeking help. It's about seeking, how can I learn to regulate, maybe if I need medications because there's a biological issue and things like that.
And I think with that said,
yeah.
I know it's a hard one to kind of have our listeners, but I think when you're consistently emotionally dysregulated, right?
Yes,
you're just angry all the time. You're just, irritated all the time. We all have our moments of emotional dysregulation.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm just saying this, like, it's okay at times when we have those moments, but we also have the moment of asking for forgiveness, right? And we have the moment of reconciliation and of saying, oh my gosh, that was not a nice way of me to talk to you or whatever, right? So I just wanted to make that point there, because I know it just seems hard to say, if you're emotionally dysregulated, you're not showing Christ to others. Yes, sometimes we are just emotional dysregulated, and we're showing Christ in the way we reconcile that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and actually that's a perfect point, because the truth is, once again, we are sinful, fallen human beings, right? And so I do think, to echo what you're saying, we're going to have our moments. How do we reconcile in those moments? But then, are we actually seeking to get better? And that's really, I think, the key that I was missing a second ago, that I'm glad you brought out, is that it is about, like, when we recognize that, for instance, I might be quick to speak and slow to listen, that I'm recognizing, oh my goodness, this is a skill I need to learn, because I'm not being a good friend to other people, and I want to be able to be a good friend, and I want to be more Christ-like. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to learn how to listen better and be slower to speak, right? So it is also that proactive seeking of help, and not just living in that line. I think another idea is in our interpersonal relationships, right? And so we are called to love others, even our enemies. We're called to treat people with respect. I mean, the Bible is chock full of statements and references. We have Ecclesiastes, John, Proverbs, 1 John, Luke. I mean, we could go on and on about how we are called to love others and to be respectful towards them. And so I think, when we're not seeking to learn how to be effective in our interpersonal communication, then we're struggling, once again, to interact in ways that we've been called. And once again, it doesn't mean that I'm a failure because I haven't learned by now, but it's about recognizing it and then learning how to get, to build these skills so that we can love others well. But I think the last one is interesting, is radical acceptance. And so you brought it up at the beginning, and I was so excited when you brought it up at the beginning, because this is part of the key of life, right? When we fully and deeply trust God, that He is good, that His plan for our lives is good, and it's for His glory, even when we don't understand, even when we don't like it, but that we trust Him. We are living in radical acceptance. And I know personally, for me, those times where I've been like, I don't like this God and we're not doing this, and I fight His plan, I'm angry, or I'm depressed, or I'm sad, or I'm dysregulated. I'm not a good mom. I'm not a good wife. I'm not a good friend. I pull into myself, and I cause my own self so much more pain and agony than I need to. It doesn't, once again, as we work on being clear on these things, it doesn't mean I have to like it. It doesn't mean that it was okay, maybe, in a case of trauma or abuse or things like that. It does mean I need to go seek my own counseling to maybe get to that place where I can accept that this is where I'm at. But, but it is, we are called to surrender our lives. Habakkuk, Psalms 131, Romans 8:28, all of these verses talk, and these books of the Bible talk about trusting God's plan for our lives. And so I radical acceptance within DBT will definitely talk about that idea of like that, we have to accept things as they are, right in front of us. Doesn't mean we have to like them, doesn't mean it was okay, but we accept them. And it's just totally how the Bible talks about it for us.
Which is hopeful. I mean, I think we need to have that outside, just greater, God that we can trust, because things happen in our lives that are just hard and difficult. And we need to be able to know that there's something good that's going to come out of it in some way, because He does work all things good for those who love Him, right?
Absolutely.
So why don't you leave us with a few DBT skills that we can practice on our own so that we could get better at these skills of mindfulness and regulating our emotions and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking of just some quick and easy things that we can do on our own. And so DBT, like they're all acronyms. It's great. So they're really easy to remember. And so for a distress tolerance skill, one of the ones that I love to suggest is TIP. And what TIP stands for is tipping the temperature of your face with cold water, intense aerobic or exercise, paced breathing, and paired muscle relaxation. So in a moment where you're feeling super overwhelmed or out of control, or you're recognizing that you're in a stressful situation and you may not handle it correctly, you can go and splash some cold water on your face. Even just walking away to the bathroom or the kitchen and splashing a little bit of cold water on your face, even in that moment, you've changed where you were about to go with your emotional dysregulation. Intense aerobic exercise. Nicole, you and I talk about this. I will get on my bike or go out for a run and just work it off. I did it this weekend. I was irritated with something that happened, and I decided before I reacted, I was going to go ride my bike really hard, and then I would deal with it. And it's amazing how it helps in those couple minutes. Paced breathing would be, breathing in for a count. So maybe you breathe in for 8 and then maybe out for 4, for instance, or in for 4 and out for 8. You could do it, but it's going to be breathing in at a pace and then breathing out at a pace. And so that deep breathing exercises that we so often teach in therapy. And the last one is paired muscle relaxation. And so, it's going to be tensing and tightening parts of our bodies and then releasing them. So as we do those things, and we're in a little bit of a calmer state, then some of the questions we can ask ourselves are things like, what was the event that triggered my emotions? And we can choose to check the facts about it. So what interpretation or assumption am I making about this event? So I tell a really quick story. So if you were standing on the side of the road and you had a flat tire, your car was broken down, and you're like, I just need help. And you watch a friend drive by, make eye contact with you, and continue driving, many of us are going to make an assumption or a judgment of, are you serious? Why you just left me on the side of the road here, right? And we might get angry or irritated or frustrated. We might give them a call and be like, excuse me, where are you going? But when we find out that the facts of the situation is that they had a really sick kid in their car that was headed for the hospital, that changes our inner feelings all of a sudden.
Absolutely.
There's suddenly I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, right? So being able to really look at the situation to say, am I making an assumption or a judgment about the situation, or are there facts? And so within that, you can even ask yourself, what interpretation, like I said, am I making about the events? Does my emotion and my intensity fit the facts of the situation or just the assumption of the situation? And then we can practice skills like opposite action. So maybe I actually do have every right to be super angry with what's going on around me. But instead of yelling or reacting in that more intense way, I can actually try to take a breath and talk really quietly, or to talk slower, for instance. Maybe we stop and listen, help me understand what's going on. And then, we're able to give some of our side. If we withdraw when we're sad, for instance, we might purposely go visit a friend or call a family member, or we can problem solve. And so we can teach some of those skills, obviously, in therapy, but yeah, it's really, I think if we stop ourselves and then we really look, is it a fact or is it an opinion or assumption? And then what do I need to do about that in that problem solving? Super helpful.
I like this opposite action thing. I'm gonna try that when I feel like yelling or I don't know. See if I speak quietly, they're gonna look at me like, what are you doing?
But I'll tell you, it's amazing. They did a study on putting a pencil in your mouth, because when you do that, your smile, these muscles are forced to go up, and that even that little bit of a change, that opposite action, while it doesn't totally change everything, it actually starts to send a trigger to your brain of just releasing some of the negativity. And so that opposite action can be super powerful. Once again, instead of staying in bed, go call a friend. It's really cool to see how it works.
This is awesome. This is really good. Thank you, Monica. Thank you for taking the time just to be with us today. It is time to close out the show. So we thank you, Monica, for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we hope that you learned some new things about therapy, DBT, and the importance of being mindful and regulating your emotions. If you are listening and you don't have a good grasp on that, please reach out to us at wellspringmiami.org. And thank you, of course, for joining our show and listening. Again, if you joined this program midstream, you can find this show and others on podcast at Wellspring on the Air or on our blog at wellspringmiami.org. The title of today's show, again, was Understanding Therapy. What is DBT therapy? Encourage us and let us know you're listening by sending comments or questions to ontheair@wellspringmiami.org. It's time to wrap up. This is Nicole Alfonso with Wellspring on the Air, because hearts and minds matter.